When you think of the greatest stealth games of all time, you're likely to think of a few games. One of the Metal Gear Solid titles, Splinter Cell Chaos Theory perhaps, Dishonored maybe?
You look like you're up to no good.
To me, there's one that completely tops all of them, Thief: The Dark Project. Thief: The Dark Project is a first-person immersive sim stealth game released in 1998 by the legendary Looking Glass Studios. For this review, I'll be looking at Thief Gold, which was a re-release of The Dark Project the following year, with a few extra levels and some small tweaks. This is the version of the game you'll see on digital stores nowadays, and is in my opinion the best version. There's no shortage of Thief reviews on YouTube, but I wanted to throw my hat into the ring and also get the chance to talk about what I specifically love about Thief 1, and why I think it remains as not just one of the best stealth games ever, but one of my favourite games of all time. Before I jump in, if you enjoy my content but aren't subscribed, maybe consider subscribing. It helps me out. Also, follow me on Twitter if you aren't already. With that out of the way, let's get into it.
I was a kid. No parents, no home.
In Thief, you play as Garrett. In the intro cutscene, he is a homeless child caught pickpocketing by a mysterious man who takes him in to join a hidden organisation called the Keepers. The Keepers operate from the shadows and try to keep the balance of world events in check using knowledge learned from studying ancient texts and prophecies. After a brief tutorial mission, Garrett decides to leave the Keepers after however long and uses newfound skills to become a master thief. The rest of the game takes place some time after this and has you going through various missions with the main objective of breaking into places, stealing things, and then getting back out. Thief's greatest asset is its immersion factor, which I'll go over several times in this video, talking about different aspects. The first of which is its world building. Thief's world is odd. A blend of medieval and steampunk, with a differing intensity of fantasy elements. Cobblestone streets with strange energy-emitting lamps, and houses ranging from the rich and fancy to the hostile and otherworldly. It's fantastical, and sometimes to the extreme, even delving into outright horror at times, but every so often it brings itself back down to a relatable enough level. The game takes place in a city known only as the City, and outside of a few factions, there's not too much known about the world itself. What the game does show and tell you oozes charm though. Aside from the Keepers, the other two big factions are the Hammerites and the Pagans. The Hammerites are a religious order, most comparable to Christianity probably. They worship a god known as the Builder, and speak in an older, archaic style of English, while everyone else speaks more modern English, albeit with a made-up swear word thrown in.
That's stupid! People to worry about there on the inside!
No, then you catch them before they get inside, you taffer.
Are you taffing me?
They believe in enforcing order and the progress of civilization with cities and structures, anything that helps maintain their rule. They are usually seen wielding massive hammers, both symbolic and practical, that they absolutely will beat you over the head with, and think nature is something chaotic and evil to be stomped out. On the opposite end, you have the pagans, who worship the trickster god, also known as the Woodsy Lord, and live amongst nature, mostly outside of the city. They speak in a more twisted and childlike tongue, though it's sometimes poetic. The pagans believe in the opposite of the Hammerites, that civilization is the enemy, and that nature should reclaim its place. They also use magic and have their own strange creatures within their society. Speaking of, the creatures in Thief are quite creepy. Outside of basic humans, you have things like giant spiders, giant spiders, mantis men, zombies, elementals, dinosaur-like beasts called burricks, and more. It's a weird blend of strange things that you wouldn't expect to find in a game about thievery of all things, but it comes together to create what remains a very interesting and unique world. Almost every level has letters and notes you can read to learn just a bit more of the world and people that inhabit it too. I'm not much of a reader, but they're usually interesting enough that I don't skip them. Garrett himself is one of the most instantly likable characters out there, with an amazing voice acting performance by Stephen Russell. He usually delivers his lines in a very dry and sarcastic tone, but with an element of cynicism and wit to them, in a way that makes him come off confident and almost effortless in his abilities.
I have a simple job planned for this evening. Break into a guarded mansion, steal another fat nobleman's priceless trinket, and leave quietly. Could you possibly be any more helpful? So, this is the Lost City. It's not lost no more. It's a throne room. How pretentious can you get?
Contrasted with his own voice acting, the guards and NPCs of the world sound almost comical and over the top, which just helps to make Garrett feel like one of the few grounded characters in the world.
I'm going to the bear pits tomorrow. You wanna come with?
Couldn't pay me enough.
What? You soft belly. The bears have got these new muzzles with underslung cheek spikes. Last time I was there was a real eye gouging.
That protects us from the squalid past. Knowledge is our weapon, with which we carve a path to an enlightened future.
The entire voice cast are generally really enjoyable to listen to, and during gameplay most NPCs will mutter or whistle to themselves, which helps to make the game world feel alive. My favourite NPCs are probably the mages. They just sound really stupid and smug when they talk.
I shall build shelters from the winds, feel the countless waters, see the vast earth and burn eternal fires.
Despite this, I also think Thief's world comes off very cold and empty, in a good way. Outside of the tutorial mission and the very beginning of another, the whole game takes place at night when most people would be asleep, which ends up making the city feel a bit lonely. The skyboxes of the game never really show what's on the outside world either, which makes you feel almost completely isolated, and the sound design of the world has a dark ambient quality to it all around. I'll come back to this later as I think it's a very important aspect of the game to touch on. Thief's gameplay itself revolves around long individual missions with different objectives to complete and loot goals to meet. There are multiple difficulties, and each high difficulty adds additional objectives for you to finish, with Expert also enforcing a no-kill rule on humans. For this review I played on Expert, as I think it's the best way to experience the game, both in terms of challenge for not letting you kill everyone, and experiencing more of each level by giving you more things to do. Once you start a level, you will usually be outside of the objective zone and have to make your way inside. The most important tools you have at your disposal in Thief are light and sound. At the bottom of the screen there is a light gem that indicates if you are visible or hidden. If the gem is lit up, you are very noticeable to enemies, and if it's completely dark, you are basically invisible. Both you and enemies make sounds when walking around. Most surfaces can actually be run across, and enemies might comment on hearing a sound but will never actually turn around. On the flip side, some surfaces like metal or marble are so loud you'd think Garrett has bowling balls strapped to his feet. If we're being realistic for a moment, I can't see why he wouldn't just take his shoes off when walking across these surfaces. Try walking across a marble floor in socks in real life. Literally nobody is going to hear you. That aside, if you keep in mind these light and sound mechanics, you'll be set for your stealth journey. Most levels will have multiple instances of environments that are lit up and difficult to sneak through, or have rooms with loud surfaces, and there's more than one way to get around most of these obstacles. I'll go over all of the important tools now to get them out of the way. First up, we have a full-size sword Garrett carries with him everywhere. You'd think he'd only carry a concealed blade or small dagger, which he does in Thief 3, but for the first two games you get this nice sword. It's useful against creatures on all difficulties, and humans on anything lower than Expert, with the ability to perform weak horizontal slashes or a strong overhead attack, and block incoming attacks to stop yourself from taking damage.
Now stand aside, worthy adversary. 'Tis but a scratch.
The direction your slashes come from is dependent on which direction you're swinging from, which doesn't really make much difference, but it is cool. If you get completely crowded, don't expect the sword to do much for you at that point, as groups of enemies will beat you to death faster than you can swing your sword. The sword also makes you more visible and slows you down, so it's best to only have it equipped when necessary. Next up we have the blackjack, your overall best friend. Hitting any unaware enemy over the head with this will send them straight to sleep. Just be sure to hide the bodies afterwards, or an enemy might discover them and go into a cautious state. Hitting alerted enemies with the blackjack is about as useful as slapping them with a rubber chicken, and while they can be killed by it if you hit them enough times, there's basically no situation you'd ever want to beat somebody to death with a blackjack, outside of them pissing you off and you wanting to take your frustration out on them. You're given a bow with multiple arrow types. Normal arrows are good for taking out creatures from a distance, or situationally hitting buttons from afar, and mostly pointless against humans on expert difficulty. I say mostly because if you deal enough damage to an enemy, they'll run away instead of continuing to fight you, which can be good for keeping them away from you. This applies to the sword as well. Water arrows are your next best friend, used for extinguishing lit torches in the environment, which makes getting through some environments significantly easier. They're also pretty cheap in the shop, so you can usually stock up on a good number of these. Fire arrows are explosive and decent against monsters sometimes, mostly when there's multiple in crowds. They travel in a straight line, but are also quite slow and expensive, so they're best used sparingly. The most use I ever get out of them is for puzzles. Moss arrows are used to create several patches of moss on surfaces so that you can move across them silently. Quite useful if the noisy surface covers a lot of ground or is in a well lit and guarded room, but otherwise an exploit where you simply tap or hold W for short periods of time will let you move across these surfaces silently too, so they're not essential. Gas arrows are basically a projectile blackjack. Like fire arrows, they travel slowly, but anything they hit should be an instant knockout. They're very rare, so they're best saved for guards you'll struggle to blackjack normally, or against multiple enemies that are grouped up so you can knock them all out at once. Rope arrows are your third and final best friend, able to shoot onto surfaces like wood to create a rope that you can climb up and jump from. Best of all, you can pick them back up. If you jump from a rope arrow and turn around quick enough, you can take it back before you're out of reach from it. Finally, there's noisemaker arrows. Now, unfortunately, they're not very good. When fired far enough, they'll make a noise that should attract nearby enemies to it. But this sends enemies into a caution state, where they suddenly gain a sixth sense and usually end up slowly walking right up to where you're hiding, even if you're in total darkness, and then they'll notice you and go into full alert. They're more trouble than they're worth, and to add another nail to the coffin, regular arrows already make sounds when you fire them into things, albeit less reliable at catching the attention of enemies, but reliable enough you'll basically never need noisemaker arrows. As far as inventory items go, there's flash bombs, which temporarily blind enemies and even yourself if you happen to be looking at one as it hits the floor, but they can be used on alerted enemies, which makes them open to being blackjacked again. So they're essentially get out of jail free cards, very useful if you're prone to getting caught or playing without saves coming. There's also holy water, which only really comes into play against zombies. They make your water arrows deal holy damage to enemies for 30 seconds or until you switch off of them. 2 holy arrows into any zombie will give them and send their limbs flying, which is always fun to watch. Finally, there's lockpicks. You don't get these until a few missions into the game, and since the game's so old, it doesn't really have traditional lockpicking. How it works is there are locked doors and chests and levels, and some are able or only able to be opened with lockpicking, which is done by holding the use key on them with one of the lockpicks until it either opens or it stops making an unlocking sound. If it does that, then you have to switch to the other lockpick and continue until you finally open it. It's a simple system, but something about the clicking and clacking of the lockpicks just sounds so good. Garrett can lean both to the left and right and also forwards. This is helpful for looking around corners without giving too much of yourself away, or good for grabbing items off of guards passing by, or blackjacking them without getting too close. And a more niche use would be leaning against doors to hear what's in the room more clearly, which is still a cool mechanic even today. I think this is a mechanic from Thief 2 actually, and one of the fan patches just backports it into Thief Gold. You can also use the zoom mechanic from Thief 2 as well with some config edits. The last major intended mechanic would be mantling. If you jump and hold the jump key against any ledge you're facing that's low enough, you'll mantle it. This is really helpful for getting over walls or boxes or through windows, and will be something you end up doing a lot of. That said, it can be finicky, so it's recommended you quick save before any potentially fatal jumps, as you're entirely at the mercy of how generous the mantling system feels at that moment. This ladder in the 3rd level is particularly egregious. I say mantling is the last major intended mechanic because there's also bunny hopping. When moving diagonally, you move faster and your footsteps are louder. You should be more mindful when stepping on loud surfaces because of this, but you can also repeatedly jump while moving diagonally, which can get you moving really fast. You can even go so fast that the screen starts to tilt from the momentum. You can bunny hop while going forwards too, but diagonally is faster. A fun mechanic that they gutted in Thief 2 sadly, but for the better in the end. At the start of almost every level you are taken to a shop menu where you can buy some of the previously mentioned arrows and items to bring with you into the level. What I really like about this is that the amount of money you have to spend is determined by the previous level and how much loot you stole, and any money you don't spend is not carried over, so you're encouraged to spend as much of your money as possible in the shop before starting the level. Items you buy don't carry over to the next level either, so don't be afraid to use your items when necessary. I much prefer this design over letting you keep everything across the whole game. If you have too many of an item, you'll either hoard them all and never use them, or never run out of them and trivialize everything. Thief 3 had this problem, and I can confidently say it made the game significantly easier because of it. You'll find arrows and items in the levels themselves too. Some such as water arrows are quite common, so it adds another level of depth to deciding what you should spend your money on, and if it's worth skipping an expensive item or not in case it shows up in the mission anyway. The level design of Thief gives you multiple ways for its environments. It could be as simple as a more exposed front entrance or a slightly out of the way but safer side passage. Once you're inside the main area, you usually have free reign to go any direction you want, barring certain locked rooms. And there's always more than one path through a level, like mantling to higher areas or using rope arrows to get to out of reach places. The levels tend to be quite large and slightly maze-like, so to help you, you're given a map and compass. The compass is pretty self-explanatory. Have it equipped in your inventory and it will show you the current direction you're facing. The map system, however, is where it gets interesting. Instead of a one-to-one top-down view of where you are in the level in real time, the maps are actually in-world designs. What this means is that Garrett will usually have gotten his maps from different sources, and some will have well-detailed layouts of the buildings, and some are just vague guesses as to what lies ahead. The most help you get with these is the map highlighting the current general area you're in, but otherwise you're on your own to use the map and compass together to figure out where you might be. You can write down notes on the maps, which can be helpful if there's something specific you want to note down about a room or zone, but these can't be erased afterwards, so type carefully. Throughout levels, your goals will range from things like stealing a specific item, to stealing a certain amount of general loot, or stealing a person. A lot of stealing. On expert difficulty, you'll also be given the objectives of avoiding human kills and getting back to the starting area after completing the rest of your goals. The objective variety is one of Thief's greatest aspects and can really have you getting to know a level back to front sometimes, depending on the level complexity. Loot will usually just be pieces of gold here and there, sometimes even purses on a guard's belt, which you can grab if they're unaware of you. Guards might even be holding keys sometimes, which might be your only way into certain locked rooms. On expert, you'll need a good eye and should search every possible area for loot, especially since the more you obtain, the more you'll be able to buy at the start of the next level, which in turn will make that level easier. The gameplay loop feeds into itself, which makes it really satisfying. Enemies are generally not too tough to get past, provided you aren't jumping around like an idiot and using your tools wisely. They tend to talk to themselves, which means you should always be able to gauge how far an enemy is before you start waltzing into their sight or hearing range. But on a first playthrough, it can also be easy to run into enemies or situations unexpectedly. So it's good to always be constantly saving, especially since there's no auto-saving. You get many manual save slots and only one quick save slot, so you should always have enough backup saves if you're doing it regularly enough. Thankfully, guards sent into an alert mode will eventually lose track of you if you can evade them for long enough. If you do have to kill or knock somebody out, you can at least pick up their bodies to hide them somewhere else.
Did you say something?
Some of the non-human types can be kind of difficult to tell if you've got them in a cautious or alert state, so I prefer to just kill or run past most of these enemies, as they're either easy to dispatch or slow enough to not worry about. The only non-human enemy that can be a real pain are zombies, as they're usually in groups, and killing them without outright blowing them up into pieces means they'll just get back up again if you make too much noise near them. I think the variety in levels is another one of Thief's greatest aspects. One mission you'll be breaking into a manor, another you'll be raiding a haunted tomb or cathedral, discovering a lost city, or even going undercover as a hammerite. Some people use this as a negative against Thief. that a lot of the game doesn't actually play into its namesake, or at least not with humans as much, but I quite like the variety. It keeps the game interesting, and considering it's actually quite a long game, that's a good thing. If you want a more grounded experience with less of the supernatural elements, you always have Thief 2, which is the thing that mostly sets that game apart from this. It helps give both games their strengths and weaknesses, and it means there's not really an outright objective better game at the end of the day, just what you prefer from its level structure. I want to circle back to what I think is Thief's greatest strength, the sound design. Thief's sound was done by Eric Brogius, husband of the equally talented Terry Brogius, who also voices a character in this game, as well as Shodan from the System Shock games. I think Eric has pulled off nothing less than an absolute masterclass in sound design with this game. The world has such a cold vibe to it. Every level starts off with this low rumbling sound. Outdoor environments will have the sound of gentle wind around you. And certain rooms and objects just make strange, unexplainable sounds. When music does kick in, it's usually very ambient, to the point it just ends up feeling like part of the game world after a while. Sometimes these ambient pieces can be heard from specific angles before approaching them, which just adds to that otherworldly feeling of these sounds simply existing in these spaces. There are a few times actual music kicks in, but you can probably count the number of times this happens on one hand. Sometimes you'll hear more aggressive industrial tracks, usually in the cutscenes, which again just adds to that unusualness of the world, to have a style of music so modern against a setting so old. Thief also has such an immersive quality to its sounds. You'll hear appropriately creepy noises coming from places that are haunted. Or machinery sounds when sneaking through a factory. And the vast majority of the time they sound accurate to where they should be coming from and have realistic reverb and echo to them. There's many different sounds in the game, how quiet or loud you are when dropping items, different surfaces hit, lots of different variables considered. The sounds for grabbing loot and completing objectives are especially pleasant to me, the latter being my phone notification sound and both being my hit and kill sounds in Team Fortress 2. If you play Thief with the EAX setting fixed and enabled and with headphones on in the dark, trust me, you will have a hard time finding anything that comes close to its immersion factor with sound. Visually, I think the game has aged fine. Character models are a bit on the ugly side, but you can always tell what kind of place you're supposed to be in, and there's a good amount of environmental variety throughout the game, so your eyes won't get tired in that department. Where I think the game does excel visually is in its cutscenes. Each of them has some kind of excerpt from the 3 factions displayed at the start, and the rest of the cutscene is then narrated by Garrett describing the job he's been tasked with doing, while having some really nice artwork and sounds to go with them, which helps set the stage for the upcoming mission.
I was going to pay Lord Randall and his vase collection a visit, but the Downwind Thieves Guild beat me to the score. Word is that they haven't divvied the booty yet. Apparently their leaders, Donald and Reuben, are arguing over the prized sapphire vase. Sounds like they could use a third party to settle their disagreement. Since I'm no mediator, I'll just steal the vase from them.
My favourite is from an end of mission cutscene midway through the game, where you see Garrett and other characters in the scene portrayed by real people, but displayed entirely as black silhouettes against the room. As expected, the sound design in these cutscenes is excellent too, though they have a very audible hissing sound to them these days, but this doesn't really detract from the overall quality.
I'd forgotten we haven't actually met yet. I am Constantine.
The game's story is fun to watch unfold. Garrett starts off with relatively small jobs, mostly unrelated to one another, just to get by. One of the early missions has him literally descending into and raiding a catacomb just to pay his rent. Eventually, he's hired by a woman named Victoria to steal a sword from a mansion owned by a man named Constantine. The mansion is weird, to say the least, and after successfully stealing the sword, Garrett meets with Constantine, who reveals that the mission was a test of sorts to see if he'd be capable enough to pull off a bigger job, stealing the Eye. The Eye is an ancient artifact sealed away by the Keepers in a haunted cathedral, and is very obviously evil.
Comes a man to rescue me. Poor man. The Keepers have sealed the door, and only they know how to open them.
There's many signs up until now that Garrett is involving himself with the wrong crowd, but despite this, Garrett accepts the job, because the cash is seemingly too good to turn down. What follows are several levels where Garrett must steal artifacts used to unseal the haunted cathedral in order to retrieve the Eye. After bringing it back to Constantine, he reveals himself to be the pagan trickster god, and has Victoria pluck Garrett's eye right from his skull. Garrett then escapes the mansion again, and teams up with the Hammerites to take down the trickster by infiltrating his realm, the Maw of Chaos. Their plan being to replace the Eye with a fake eye, while Constantine is performing a ritual to bring chaos to the city and destroy all civilization. The fake eye explodes and presumably kills the trickster, and a cutscene afterwards shows the Keepers attempting to warn Garrett of a coming prophecy, the Metal Age, which sets the stage for the sequel. It's a relatively simple story despite its scale, but one that I really enjoy. I like how it forces Garrett to fix his own mistakes and takes him from a highly skilled but low stakes thief to someone who has to almost single-handedly stop the world from ending, which becomes somewhat of a recurring theme in the sequels. My favourite level in the game is the previously mentioned mansion of Constantine. You're given little information going in, but you don't have much reason to suspect anything is off about the place, until you notice the crooked window at the start. Then, once you're inside the mansion, the level slowly gets more twisted and demonic the deeper you get. There's even a secret area added into this level for the Gold Edition, with a gigantic house you get to explore. It's very unnerving and weird, and yet the game never really draws attention to any of the weird stuff going on. Garrett doesn't even have any remarks about the place until he finally grabs the sword, and even then it's brief.
Time to take my new sword and get out of this crazy place.
It's one of the coolest levels I've ever played, and a highlight across the whole Thief series. Now, where do I feel like Thief aged poorly? Well, having played a lot of Thief, there's some things over the years that have bugged me more over time, and some things I've gotten over. As mentioned before, some people will point to the dated visuals, which, yes, I guess they can look somewhat simplistic at times, but as a person who enjoys old school 3D visuals, I don't really care. I think the inventory system could be better. There's hotkeys for some inventory items, but without tweaking some files, you'll have to cycle through your whole inventory just to get to keys for doors, which is annoying. I also think some of its systems feel a bit punishing if you don't know how they work entirely. For example, Falling off a surface is risky because you'll make a sound when landing, so you're likely to alert someone in those instances, unless of course you know that by crouching before you fall, you'll 9 times out of 10 be silent upon landing. This isn't something ever taught to the player, but can be really helpful. Another thing is the silent method of walking on loud surfaces. If you hold the walk key for just long enough before Garrett's footsteps would kick in, you'll be completely silent when walking on these surfaces. This is an exceptionally useful skill to know, but it's not something any normal player would know about on a fresh playthrough. It's one of those games that benefits with hindsight. I bounced off the game like 2 or 3 times before it finally clicked for me, and even then I'm not sure what did it. Anyone used to modern stealth mechanics like seeing through walls or whistling in a bush to stealth kill an enemy will be in for something completely different, though significantly more satisfying in my opinion. Despite this, it's actually one of the speedier stealth games I'd say, considering you can run straight up to or past most enemies once you know what you're doing. I think Thief Gold is a mixed bag in its new levels, specifically the Thieves Guild and the Mage Towers. The Thieves Guild is both way too long and way too complex on a first playthrough, especially for how early in the game it is, and it has some frustrating mandatory hidden pieces of loot that took me hours to find and left a sour taste in my mouth after finishing it. Nowadays I'm okay with the level and generally know where to go without much trouble, though it's still a long one. The other level, Mage Towers, has a great atmosphere but is quite linear, with a specific order of certain areas you must go through, all of them being kind of ugly and kind of boring. As far as the original game's levels go, I also have my issues. Both of the Haunted Cathedral levels take the piss, the first having some insanely well hidden loot on Expert in an already very maze-like environment, and the second giving you a lot of back and forth fetch quests, which would be fine if they were handed out all at once and not one after the other. The Lost City basically takes the concept of Down in the Bone Horde and makes it boring by not really having an interesting atmosphere or any traps to look out for. One of the levels has you disguised as a Hammerite and requires you to not be seen in restricted areas or steal any loot the guards would normally see, or they will set off an alarm and will all chase after you. But before this level, the game makes no indication of whether guards know if you've stolen anything or not, and the game doesn't clue you in on that for this level either. On top of that, I actively avoid doing anything suspicious a guard might see, and yet they often just decide they see through my disguise eventually anyway.
Thou shalt regret thine intrusions.
Their behaviour on this level is just very inconsistent and I've never really gotten it down completely. Finally, the last few levels just add loads of monsters into the mix and it's really not fun at all to deal with them. Strange Bedfellows outright forces you to kill all the mantis men in the level if you get in a fight with just one, and it's tedious. You can't knock them out either, you have to kill them. These few issues aside, I think Thief has aged extremely well, and if you're open to a stealth game with fantastic immersion that basically never holds your hand, you're in for an unforgettable experience. Although you should save frequently, I would recommend sticking with any mistakes you make rather than quick loading every time you're caught or miss an arrow. I played Thief this way for years and recently tried beating the whole game with only saving after completing objectives, and it made for a much more tense and fun experience. That said, I'd probably recommend this playstyle more to people familiar with the game already. Play it however you want for a first time playthrough, but I would highly suggest playing on Expert. It's not much harder overall and really just gives you more to experience. Thief is almost 30 years old, which means you'll need a few tweaks to get it to work. However, it's one of few that works incredibly well once all set up, with functioning high frame rates without problems with the game speed or physics, no UI scaling issues, and smooth controls. If you install tfix and follow the PC Gaming wiki page for Thief Gold, both of which I'll link in the description, you should be good to go with playing it without issues. Just remember, save often and stay out of the light.